Welcome to episode 99 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Karen Nelson. She's an accomplished writer and the co-founder of Writing by Writers. It is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering the next generation of storytellers. Karen has been a writer for as long as she can remember, but it wasn't until later in life that she decided to move from writing for herself to publishing her work. Her novel, The Sunken Town, was decades in the making. It is an exploration of identity, family, and the way our past shapes us. Like so many of us, Karen found that the second half of life brought a new perspective, which gave her the courage and clarity to bring her story into the world. Beyond her own writing, Karen has a deep passion for mentoring emerging authors, especially those people over 50 who are ready to put their stories on paper. She believes everyone has a voice which deserves to be heard. Through Writing by Writers, she is helping to create a supportive and inclusive community for writers of all backgrounds. So please welcome Karen Nelson to the show as she describes making her second act all about storytelling, mentorship, and giving back to the literary world. Thanks for joining me today, Karen. I really appreciate the time. What inspired you to start writing?
Oh, writing is something that I have always done. It's even as a kid, it's the way I process the world. I've always been a writer and I've always been a reader. And so it's just been a lifelong thing. And I've always written fiction. But I think what has changed for me lately is the desire to have that fiction actually published. So for years and years, I didn't care. And then I decided I've got enough here. There's something it's time for me to do something a little more formal with.
What attracted you to fiction? That can be so hard to write.
I think fiction to me actually might have more of an emotional truth than some memoir in a way. So I think I'm attracted to fiction because it's what I like to read. And I would say my life, I'm very fortunate, has not led to any dramatic instance that I really felt that I needed to write about in a memoir type way, which is not to say that I don't pull from my life for my fiction. I absolutely do. And I think there's absolutely a lot of emotional truth in it. But I feel like writing fiction lets you get at some things in a different way. And it lets you really explore what I write to answer questions or to figure things out. And so I think in putting that a little farther away from yourself helps you have a little more clarity as you're working through it. And you can say, oh, what if he said this? Or what if she said that? Or what if I went this way? And I don't really like the way that went. Or wow, that would have been interesting. And of course, it's all being made up in my mind. But it just gives you a freedom, I think, to loosens you up and lets you say things that you might not want to say if you're sticking straight to what actually happened.
I would agree with that. As a journalist, I spent most of my career writing nonfiction things, interviewing people and writing what they said, talking about their company and the products that they had, just their own experiences, etc. And when I wrote my first book, it was actually a fictional tale. And it was fun to create that kind of content and that dialogue about what the individual wanted to do and the people who came alongside him to help. So that's neat that you enjoy writing fiction as well.
I do. I've done some travel writing too, which is that is obviously what actually happens. But I love doing that because it's more the story. It's a short story of what's happening. And it lets you set the scene and use all the things from fiction without having to be what you just said, the actual reporter. That if I get the words wrong, no one's really going to care.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, if you're making up the story. That's right.
You doing it wrong, whereas for me, it's, I made it up.
So you wanted to write fiction and actually get it published, and you did with The Sunken Town. What was that about?
The Sunken Town, it's about a 30-year-old woman named Lindsay who never gave much thought to the fact that she was adopted until she unexpectedly inherits her birth mother's home, which sends her on a journey that she never planned to take. And along the way, she discovers the extent to which everyone was willing to go to protect her.
Really? Okay. So protect her as in Lindsay or protect Lindsay's mom?
Lindsay.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So it's written from two points of view. It's written from Lindsay's point of view, which is the current character. And then you also have the story of Claire, which is her birth mother. So you learn how she got pregnant and why she gave up Lindsay. And I will say I started this a long time ago, and I had written a 300-page book just about Lindsay. And it was fine. And I really felt at the end of that, I had just taught myself my process for writing a novel. And it just went in the drawer, hopefully never to be seen again. And the reason I had written that is, like Lindsay, I'm adopted. And one of the things that people always found interesting about me was that I didn't have a desire to find my birth parents. I was always perfectly happy with my life and my parents and felt things happen for a reason. And why do that? But right out of college, so this tells you how long I've kept all this stuff. Right out of college, my boyfriend was asked to caretake a house, a farmhouse in Maine that came with a dog that the woman had gone out for milk or something and been killed in a car accident. And his boss at the time was executor of the estate. And so I and I would come up and visit. So you step into this house that's exactly as this person had left it. And as a fiction writer and a reader, that just was so intriguing to me, and how much all the details told me about who that person was.
Mm-hmm.
So I took those two elements and put them together and thought, what if this had been my birth mother? And the farmhouse changed and all that. But that was the impetus for writing that initial book that went into the drawer. And then fast forward years later, I decided I was going to write a new book, and that one was set in Maine. And I started writing, and I had this grand plan. I went to a small college in Maine. I was going to write one of these wonderful dark academia, the secret history type books. It turns out I'm not very dark. And what came out, I realized, was a layer of the book that was in the drawer. So I realized I was writing Claire's story, the birth mother story. And so I wrote about 100 pages on that. And then I took Lindsay out of the drawer, and I said, okay, so before I just had a dead woman, I had a dead mother, I didn't have anything else. Now I suddenly had all the circumstances. I had who the father was. I had all these people who were living. And so what I had to do was influence the story, because I'd essentially written the prequel. So then I kept about 100 pages of that 300-page book, and I wrote another 100 that tied it all up. And that's what I have done recently. And then I decided, let's get this thing out in the world. And here we are.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting concept. Were you writing any of your story into either of the characters?
I think all the characters certainly have parts of me, but yes, in the sense that I've still never decided to search for my birth parents, and my mother is still alive, my adoptive mother. My adoptive father is not, so she's actually read it and gets a kick out of it, because I have one mother, and you pull from things you know. But I would say that just the setting is really what I pulled from it. But I also think it ended up really being an exploration on nature versus nurture. And the book that I wrote when I was younger, I wouldn't have been able to write now, because I feel like I had to become over 50 in order to truly get a perspective on my parents. And I watched my friends go through this. When you're a kid, your parents are one thing. And then it changes as you get older. And I watched my friends navigate this as their children are starting to see them as real people. And that certainly happened for me during the course of when this book was in the drawer. I could see my parents as real people. I could see everyone's flaws and understand a lot more the reasoning behind it. And I feel like that helped me write a much fuller book and a much more nuanced book than I would have the first time. So that was a really positive thing with the time it took me and keeping it in the drawer for a while.
Did you opt to self-publish your book, or did you find a publisher?
I found a publisher. Because I work publishing adjacent, it was very important to me that I find a traditional press. And that was just a bar that I set for myself. And there's nothing wrong with any type of publishing. I think that people should do what works best for them. For me, this was what I wanted. And so I really wanted to go with a small press, because I really believe in the work of small presses, and I believe in the work of independent bookstores. So the reason I decided to get this out was at the beginning of the pandemic. I've had a long writing group for a long time, and I've probably been the person who stayed in touch with the different members. We haven't always been together. But at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my friends called and said, look, I have no job. I live alone. I've got all this time. I need to write a book. Can we get the group back together? So I said, sure. And I reached out to everyone and we started meeting on Zoom every 2 weeks. And each week we would set a writing goal. And then at the end of the week, we'd say whether or not we completed it. And then every 2 weeks we'd check in and basically just give each other therapy to talk about where we were in the process. And at the beginning of that, I said, okay, I'm going to write a new book. And I realized I had this book that I would just described. It was close, but it wasn't quite ready. And I had another book that was close, but not quite ready. And I thought, why am I going to move forward when it's time to finish these two projects? And at the same time, a peer of mine had recently had her books published. And I had just seen, and that had always been her goal. And I'd seen the process she'd gone through. And I thought, okay, she can do this. I can do this. And a third thing happened at the same time. A woman who teaches for me at my nonprofit, which is called Writing by Writers, and it's a literary nonprofit that puts on writing workshops. She had said to me in grad school, her professor had said, you're all capable of being published, but really it's the person who hangs on the longest. And the analogy she used was last hand on a hard body, which are those silly contests where people have to keep their hand on the car, and whoever keeps their hand on the car longest wins it. And so I had all these things coming at me at the same time, and I thought, okay, this is it. It's time to get it published. So I started looking for both an agent and a small press at the same time. And I just found this wonderful small press that is called Sibylline, and they focus on the brilliant work of women over the age of 50. And that's their words, not mine, but I say it all the time. And I loved what they were about. I loved that they focused on women over 50. I loved that they were a small press. I loved everything about them. And it was really just the perfect fit. And so that's where I went. And it all worked out. And it's a long process, but here we are.
You are based in California. Is the press in California too?
The press is based in California. I think they're technically based in Grass Valley. It's one of those wonderful things that we have these days that since everybody can work over Zoom, I believe that maybe their P.O. box is in California. But there's the publisher herself is down in San Diego. We've got people up in Marin County. So it's spread across California, but it's mainly Western based.
Okay. What was the advantage to using a traditional publisher versus self-publishing for you?
For me, I think one is distribution and marketing and the expertise, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big social media user. I'm not a big self-promoter. I'm not a big marketer. I do all those things in my job, but I felt that somebody who really knew the industry, someone who was really passionate about books, somebody who believed in me. I mean, I think more than anything, it was just having the vote of confidence that somebody else thought that this book was worthy of being out in the world. It wasn't my mother saying, oh, this is great, or my friend saying, oh, it's wonderful, or my husband, oh, it's you. It was a completely outside source that said, this book hits a certain bar and we want it and we want to put it out in the world. And I think I personally needed that to feel successful. But as I said, that's me. And I think that self-publishing and hybrid publishing are absolutely right for other people. It just, for me, it wasn't.
I noted you said that you had worked with a group of writers for years, or you'd been meeting with them, sharing your ideas, developing out characters and plots, etc., or just talking about books and having that accountability. Was that instrumental in helping you finish your book, push it across the finish line anyway?
I think having this support is important. And I think having a writing community is very important. Writing, as you are well aware, is a very solitary thing. And you can't do this if you're not willing to spend a lot of time alone or a lot of time with all the voices in your head. And you have to have a lot of drive. I think there are many people that say, oh, I always wanted to write a book. How do you do that? I said, you sit down and you start writing. And then when it gets hard, you have to keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what having this writing group, I think it plays different roles as where you are in your writing process. I think when you're a new writer, it is really important to be in some type of class that has a teacher or a head figure that has the experience that can help teach and guide. Because often a new writer will say, even if it's fiction, well, that's the way it happened. It doesn't matter if that's the way it happened. So you have to learn the elements of craft. And I think it's really important to learn the elements of craft from somebody who knows them and teaches them. And so often people will start meeting peers in that, and you get very comfortable exchanging your work, criticizing each other's work. I think you learn just as much from critiquing others, people's pieces, understanding what's working and what's not, as you do with your own and hearing what's your own. I think as I progressed and I needed less of the craft, although I think craft is always incredibly important for everyone, and I think you still learn it no matter what. And I think you hear things differently depending on where you are in your life and in your manuscript. I think then having really the support was key, that somebody who's not a writer, I believe, doesn't fully understand what you're going through. I feel like people who are artists and musicians and in the other form of arts will understand. But I needed to have someone that I could call and say, oh my God, it's so hard and I hate this and I'm having a bad day. Or one of my good writing friends, we had a 30-minute conversation on when we should be using italics. And a non-writer doesn't want to have that conversation with you. And honestly, a writer at a certain point in their career can have that conversation with you, because you have to have gotten to a certain point to really understand what you're talking about to have these conversations. So having that is great. Me personally, the ideas and the characters and all that I'm coming up with on my own. I know as a writer, my challenge is that I don't let things get messy enough on the page. I'm a problem solver in real life. I will solve the problem before I let it happen. And so I'm aware of that. And I think that's really important, to have trusted readers come in and say, she fell into the lake, but nothing really happened underwater. So you need to make it a little worse. And so having those trusted readers at critical stages are key. But ultimately, it comes down to what I'm able to do as a writer, too.
That's a great idea, to have the other folks reading the stuff and critiquing it, to come up with those details as the outsiders, because we get so involved in writing our stories. In fact, what is a common thing is you write a book that you want to read because you're going to be reading it over and over again.
Over again.
So to have that outside, you become just immersed in everything in that book. And so to have an outsider come in and say, wait a minute, I don't get this character. Why did she do this? Or why did he want to move in this direction? In your mind, you know why he did it, but to help the readers bridge that gap is important, to have that outside help.
Correct. And I also think it's, depending on where you are in the process, it's important to have someone who's a writer, because they can put it in terms that you understand. But it's great when there are people who are wonderful readers who are not writers that are very helpful. But it's much more helpful, I find, in the early stages to have people that have been in your place and are struggling with the same elements of craft to give you advice, versus just your best friend who's going to say, oh, no, I get it. It's because you did this in your real life, and so it makes sense. And it not makes sense to a reader who's coming to it blind.
And sometimes we need somebody to come alongside us and give us a good kick to break that train of thought that we are in, to make it even better. So that's neat.
Exactly.
When did you decide to start writing by writers?
I decided to start writing by writers. It was a side project, and that was about 13 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
My business partner and I had been friends since 2001. She actually started as my writing teacher. She's a well-respected writer. Her name is Pam Houston. And I had taken a writing workshop from her, and then had subsequently been invited to be in her private writing group, and had done that for years. And people always used to joke about the two of us that we could run a multinational company, because she can talk people into things and I just do everything else. We decided, she used to be head of creative writing at University of California at Davis, and they had a writing workshop they were putting on. And the university decided that it was no longer in their best interest. And I have had a long career in nonprofits. And I was with her for the weekend up in Point Reyes, California, which is where the conference was being put on. And we ran into the bookshop people who said, okay, if the university's pulling out, we'd like to continue this. It's such a wonderful thing for the community. And I would just happen to be along. So they said, why don't you just come along too? And what they didn't know was my background in nonprofits. So by the end of that dinner, I said to her, we can do this. I could put this event on in my sleep, and I think we should try it. And I think that it's a good thing. So I went and applied for our nonprofit status, our 501c3. And we took a year off and then we reincarnated it and that was the beginning. And it went really well. And we ended up at the end of that with a little money, which we wanted to invest into a new type of writing workshop. So we've just grown from there. And what our goal at Writing by Writers, it's nationally known writers who are working with, it's all levels. And we've been trying to fill in the gaps that aren't out there. So we don't want to just put on there's plenty of writing workshops and writing classes, but really listening to people as to what's not out there, what type of things they need to learn, and what type of workshops to put on. That little side project grew, and unfortunately, I lost my mother-in-law too young, and it caused my husband and I to have one of those conversations of life's too short.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that at that point, it was time to make it my full-time passion along with the writing. And so that's what I've decided to do in this after 50 phase. And it's just been wonderful to be able to focus on essentially what was my passion has become my career on both sides.
What did you do for a career before you took on this project?
Always nonprofit. So for years, I worked for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, putting on a program called Team in Training, where people trained for endurance events and they raised money for cancer research. I worked for a breast cancer organization. I worked for environmental nonprofit.
Okay.
So always been in the nonprofit space. Doing something with my time that I'm passionate about has always been critical to me. But I think this big shift of taking the leap and having founded a nonprofit and really gone forward with it has been a big sort of second half of my life change.
Is Writing by Writers just putting on the seminars, or is it like a membership organization that people join?
Anyone can join. It's not a membership. We have a community. I would say we have a strong literary community. So we put on writing workshops online, everything from just a 2-hour craft session, which might be on dialogue or creating exciting characters. And then we also do in-person workshops. So we do your traditional writing workshop, which would be you have, there are 5 faculty members, you're in a class of 12, you bring a short story or a chapter or a memoir, and that during the week you get critiqued. So it's a critique class. We have a program which is fairly unique, where if you have a full book-length manuscript, whether it's a novel, a memoir, an essay collection, short story collection, you bring that and there's 5 people in a class with a nationally known writer leading it, and you get your full book-length manuscript read. So that's a great thing for people who've written a book and don't have this community. They haven't developed it yet, so it gives you a community. Our goal is always, when people come to our workshops, is that they leave with at least one trusted reader, because that, as I mentioned earlier, I think is key in order for emotional support, but also creative support and to help you do your book. So we're trying to build that community as much as we are trying to teach people the craft of writing. We also have a 2-year book building project called Draft, where it's essentially going to a low residency MFA program without the university. Every 6 months, they turn in 75 pages, or what's really 20,000 words, 40,000, then 60,000, then 80,000. And we're meeting in person every 6 months for a long weekend, again, to critique that work in progress. And then off times where we do online check-ins, they read certain books and discuss them from a craft element. So it's, like I said, an MFA without the university. And some of these anyone can sign up for. Some of them you have to be accepted to. But I think that one of the most amazing things that I didn't realize when we started this was just the community that we were going to form and how wonderful that would be. There are some writing workshops that there's the faculty who are up on high and there's the writers who are down here. And that's just, we have not ever wanted to be that. We want it to be everyone is in this together. Everyone is learning from each other. And our faculty are Pulitzer Prize winners or National Book Award winners. It's not that they're just your average Joe pulled off the street. They're very accomplished. And most of them teach in the university system. So this is another opportunity for somebody who isn't in academia and not getting an MFA and isn't 22, that they can work with these really well-respected writers, but more importantly, just amazing teachers on the craft of writing.
There's got to be a cost to this. If you've got these highly acclaimed, nationally recognized authors involved in teaching other people.
There is a cost.
Okay, cool.
But that's where the nonprofit comes in. So we are doing it at a break-even point for us. And we also have fellowships. So because it's a nonprofit, we are able to get donations from all sorts of people, which we then offer fellowships based on purely on writing talent to most of our workshops. It's not just for the well-off. It's really important to us and part of our mission that we're having inclusive workshops so that anyone can come, no matter what your level or your socioeconomic level is, that you could take part in this.
Okay, that's good.
And on the other side, we have very generous donors. So we're lucky that many people who find us late in life have had careers, are looking for a way to give back. And so they do support other writers it's what we say, it's people whose voices need to be heard. And that's been really heartwarming to see how many writers not only come to us, but then support other writers. We also have a relationship with the Institute of American Indian Arts. So we get a lot of Native writers coming through, which I think is really something we're very passionate about as far as the other voices being heard.
I love that idea of voices that need to be heard and
Absolutely.
helping to produce that, because I truly believe that everybody has a story within them. By the time we get to our age, we've had so many life experiences and we've learned so much that it's almost incumbent upon us to share that with other people.
Absolutely. And I think finding the commonality and sharing these stories are the way to combat a lot of the negativity that we are seeing in the world. It's trying to find a common ground, trying to learn, understand people as a human on a human level, see where you connect, and see that we have more similarities than we do differences. And so I think that is really the type of atmosphere we're trying to set in these workshops. And giving a platform for voices that might not otherwise have that platform, whether that is because of your age, race, background, all of that. We want it to be super inclusive.
Especially finance.
And especially,
And a lot of people think that you have to have a lot of money in order to do a book, and it's not the case.
It's not the case.
Right.
I think a lot of people think they're going to make a lot of money from writing a book,
That's
which
true.
is also not the case. So nobody should go into this as how they're going to make their millions in their retirement. But
That's exactly
it
right.
should be because you have a story that you want to share, and it's important to get out in the world.
And contributing that information to the world body of knowledge.
Exactly.
Excellent. Do you have any regrets? If you had to go back in time, is there anything you'd do differently?
It's an interesting question. And I think as I've gotten over 50, I think that is something that I notice when I like the books that I'm attracted to. And was it The Midnight Library? Some of these more popular books are exactly on that topic. If you had the chance to go back over and you said yes to this college or yes to that college or yes to this date or no to that date, I don't. I would say everyone has small regrets, but I don't have any large regrets because I think I have been really fortunate to start with and privileged another way. But all of my experiences have led me to this point. And I would have said when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be a writer. And I would have said that I wanted to work with books and writers. And I studied writing in college, so it wasn't that I wasn't on this path, but I think there's also a practicality that comes in, certainly in my sense of the world, that you're not always really encouraged to be a writer. You're encouraged to do something that you can support yourself, and then writing is always on the side. And I think it's been just, I ended up at all the little stepping stones, all the jobs I had, all the things I learned working for a nonprofit kind of all came to a climax in being able to then apply that to this one that we founded. So I am very happy with where I've ended up. I feel like I still got a lot of places to go too.
It's funny how that often works that way, that all of these things just seem to combine at the end of our life or in the second half of our life. Everything was preparation for what we're stepping into after we turn 50. And that's more of a destiny. And when you look back and you see all of these things happening and all this stuff moving into that pinnacle, it makes sense. But yeah, that's neat.
But it's the perspective. I've spoken to some younger college students, and then here's the pathway I took. Just because you maybe don't get your first job you absolutely want out of college doesn't mean that you can't forge a career in a life that's the one that you want.
That's right. So even as a child, you knew you wanted to be a writer,
That is
but
true.
your career went in a different path and more
Absolutely.
public relations, fundraising, nonprofit work, etc.
Mhm.
But then it came back to this very early passion of yours.
Absolutely.
What happened to her? Why do you think that worked that way?
I think that's an interesting question. How did it work that way? I think that I just have always been someone that needs to do things that I love in order to stay engaged. And I've had the fortune of that. So I think that as I've come back to it because it was the passion of mine. And I've had the time. I think that's the over 50, or as you start to look towards retirement, that when you and maybe the pandemic did this for a lot of people, suddenly you've got all this time.
Mm-hmm.
And the pandemic was a horrible thing and many people had terrible
Right.
experiences. But one of the things I think that it did for a lot of people that I know was, okay, I've got all this time and how am I going to spend it? I want to spend it on something very worthwhile. And I think that is why I've come back to me, my passion is what's important. And that's what I thrive on. That's my emotional health. That's my physical health. That's what makes me a good friend, a good partner. All of those things is being able to do something that fuels me, helps me then be a better person out in the world. Coming back to it, I think it never left me. It was about being able to make it a priority and push aside all the other things that were perhaps more noise in the world, and to be able to really come back to what is the core of who I am and what I like to do.
I agree. A lot of times when we get to that 50 point or 50-year milestone, we can start slowing down a bit. Many of us who've raised families, the kids are off on their own, etc. And all of a sudden we have more time than we know what to do with.
Right.
And then many times if we've done it, we have more money than we've had in the past. So that works out to our advantage. And it's so important to find something for us to do, because I know here in Sun City, Arizona, a lot of people come here, retire here, hoping to recreate or just planning to recreate, but
Yeah.
they feel unfulfilled because there's that purpose or meaningful purpose that is missing from recreating all day.
Absolutely. And having been a career nonprofit person, I would say that one of the things that was so interesting was that often in a nonprofit, your volunteer base can be people who have retired
Mhm.
and are looking to focus on their passion. And that is what, no matter what the nonprofit is, it's as they volunteer at the Humane Society, they end up being volunteers. And I think that is a wonderful way to follow your dream, stay engaged, help others. And the nonprofit, we need it. You're running so slim that it's really important. Volunteers are a key. And having volunteers who have had a long career and have these skill sets that maybe they don't want to use every day and they don't want to use at the high level that they used before, but they can come in for a day or a project and it just makes all the difference in the world. So that's something that I always encourage people who say, I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire. My life is my job. There's a lot of places out there that could use your expertise without it having to take over your life. It can just be the things you're interested in.
That was one of the things I was going to ask. If you had any advice for people over 50 who are struggling to identify purpose or a meaningful purpose for their lives and how to pursue that. So your first step would be to volunteer. Is that it?
My first step would be to understand what it is that you love. As you said, for me, I've always loved reading and writing, and that's been a part of it. I've also loved being outside. And so I know at my core what it is. I think that it's really important for people to figure out what that is about themselves. And it doesn't have to be creative, but I would say I do come from a family of lifelong learners. So I would also say classes. Classes are important. So whether it's a writing class or a photography class or a cooking class, your local community center is going to offer all sorts of things. And maybe you always wanted to cook and you never had time, and go take a cooking class. And you may figure out you never wanted to cook because you don't like cooking. But I would say classes are really important. And that also is a wonderful way to meet other people in the community that you might not have met. I would say a writer's perspective that when I moved to a new city and didn't have a writing community, signing up for a writing class was the way I met writers. But then I would also say, yes, looking around you and volunteering in a nonprofit. There are so many needs. There's nonprofits everywhere. It doesn't have to be a full-time job, but it can still give you that something that a job would, a sense of satisfaction, peers, projects to complete, but it doesn't have to completely take over. And you also don't have to, you're not getting paid, but you're also not getting critiqued or judged or all the negative things that come with it. You just get to make a contribution that's helping others. So I would say, yes, look to nonprofits as well. And I think having worked in cancer many years, I think that physical health is as important as emotional health. And I think they're very tied in. And so I think it's important that people are also paying attention to their physical health, whether that is walking or going bird watching or just getting out of their house, interacting with the world. I think that's really important to keep your body moving and keep your health up so that you can thrive on every level.
Amazing things happen physically, spiritually, emotionally when we leave our houses and we actually get out and interact with nature. Being in California, there are ample opportunities for you to do that, especially your part of California where you can go sit in the beach if you want to or go up to the mountains.
It's true. It's the reason it's expensive to live here. But yes, and I have a dog who, if anyone's watching the video and it's just heard him bark in the background, and that's a great excuse. The days I don't want to go outside, I have no choice. I have a very wet Labrador nose jabbing in my face saying, we are going for a walk, like it or not.
Something you said earlier also reminded me that we most often create our purpose rather than discover it. And we create it by trying different things until we say, hey, wait a minute, this is really fun. And all of a sudden we say, we discovered it because we tried it and we created it. We just didn't have to go looking that far. We just tried a bunch of things and suddenly something really tripped our trigger and launched us to pursue it with passion.
Absolutely. And it's okay to fail. I tried to take a pottery class because I thought, how hard could this be? And turns out some of us don't have a talent for pottery. And now I'm very happy to spend money on pottery.
That's too funny.
There's nothing wrong. Why not? It was fun.
Right. How can people connect with you?
There are multiple ways. I am on social media. I'm on Instagram at K Nelson Writer. I'm on Facebook as Karen Nelson Writer. I have a website that's probably the best one-stop shopping. It's very simple. It's karennelson.net. And from there, it also connects to my Writing by Writers site. And our website for Writing by Writers is writing, but then the letter X, writers.org. So it's 4x4. Writing by Writers, although any search engine will take it if you write it in the normal way. So those are the best ways to find me. And Writing by Writers will have, that website will have all the different writing workshops that we do, whether it's online or in person. So people can find us there. And and we're also on social media with that as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your time today, Karen. I really appreciate it. I love your passion for writing, and I love that you took it up again. Even though it was decades ago that you found called to do that and that you wrote a book, put it in a drawer, and then picked it up later and said, okay, now's the time to do it. So,
yes, I would encourage anyone who started a book long time ago. It's a lot of these books and these women that I'm with in my small press, they were decades in the making. And now is the time. There's no time like the present. I think really people, if you have a passion for it, go for it. Right. You have to lose. This is the time to do it.
Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
For Karen Nelson, writing isn't just a solitary pursuit, it's a communal experience that flourishes with support, accountability, and shared learning. That's why she co-founded Writing by Writers, a nonprofit designed to help emerging and established writers hone their craft, build confidence, and find their literary voices. Over the years, Karen has seen firsthand how transformative a strong writing community can be. She recalls how a longtime writing group helped her push through self-doubt to finish her novel. Now she's committed to offering the same kind of support to others, particularly those who are stepping into their creative ambitions later in life. Karen's organization offers workshops, manuscript reviews, and long-term mentorship programs designed to guide writers from initial ideas to finished books. Some programs are open to everyone, while others provide fellowships for those who might not otherwise have access to high-quality literary mentorship. I like Karen's message to aspiring writers over 50. Maybe you started a book 20 years ago and put it in a drawer, she explained. Maybe you've always dreamed of writing but didn't think you had the talent. I can tell you this, you have the passion and you can learn the craft, and it's never too late. People can connect with Karen through her website at www.karennelson.net, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. To learn more about her organization, visit www.writingxwriters.org. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. In fact, you won't want to miss our 100th episode. I'll be interviewing a man who has the ideal solution for seasoned citizens who wonder what they can do to enjoy more meaningful lives while making extra money doing what they love to do. Thanks for listening, and if you like the show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.